The set goes quiet in a way that has nothing to do with discipline. The camera isn't rolling yet, but the damage already is. A joke lands hard. Too sharp to be harmless, too clean to protest. A few technicians laugh, not because it's funny, but because silence would cost them more. In that pause, Robert Mitchum looks straight at Dean Martin, not smiling, not joking anymore, measuring. It's the kind of look that asks a question without words. Are you here to work or to be tolerated? Dean doesn't grin it off, doesn't fire back, doesn't explain himself. He simply holds still. No defiance, no charm, just a calm that doesn't ask permission. Something shifts. The laughter dies too quickly. Mitchum's confidence hangs in the air a second longer than planned, because insults expect resistance, or submission. What they don't expect is silence. And in that silence, everyone on the set understands the same thing at once. This isn't about a joke, a scene, or even talent. It's a test. And Dean Martin has just answered it without saying a word. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The studio lot was already awake, but not alive. Morning haze clung low to the asphalt, mixing with cigarette smoke and the bitter smell of burned coffee that had been sitting too long on hot plates. Crew members moved without urgency. This was how serious pictures started in the early 60s. Slow, cautious, respectful of the egos involved. Two worlds had been forced into the same frame. Robert Mitchum arrived first. No announcement, no smile. He didn't need either. His reputation preceded him more reliably than any press agent ever could. To some, he was the last real actor. Dangerous, unpolished, allergic to nonsense. To others, he was simply trouble that studios tolerated because the camera loved him. He stood apart from the crew, coat still on, eyes half-lidded, as if everything around him were mildly disappointing. Dean Martin showed up 10 minutes later, quiet, unhurried. No entourage, no visible performance of charm. Just a tailored jacket, dark glasses, and that relaxed posture people often mistook for carelessness. More than one person on set thought the same thing they'd thought for years. Singer, television star, box office name, but not someone you feared in a scene. The first interaction was barely an interaction at all. At the table read, Mitchum didn't look at Dean when he spoke. He aimed his voice past him, toward the room, letting it land where it would. A remark about timing, about restraint, about how some actors relied too much on personality when silence would do more work. The words were clean, professionally harmless. The implication was not. A few people laughed, not because it was funny, because laughter felt safer than stillness. Dean didn't react. He didn't smile, didn't counter, didn't deflect. He kept his eyes on the script, as if the comment had missed him entirely. That, more than any comeback, unsettled the table. Silence stretched just long enough to become visible. The day moved on. Blocking. Lighting. Minor adjustments that took longer than they should have. Mitchum made a point of not standing where Dean could see him. He addressed the director without acknowledging his co-star's presence. When Dean offered a suggestion about a mark on the floor, Mitchum stepped past him, close enough to register the cologne, and said, lightly, "I think we'll be fine." Again, laughter. Thinner this time. What nobody could quite articulate was the shift that followed. Dean didn't withdraw, but he didn't engage either. He listened. He watched. He absorbed the rhythm of the set. Who spoke when? Who hesitated? Who deferred? His calm wasn't passive. It was deliberate. During a short pause, Mitchum finally looked at him. Just once. A sideways glance, measuring, dismissive. The kind of look meant to settle hierarchy early. Dean met it without expression. No challenge. No warmth. Just presence. The moment passed, but something remained behind it. An unease that had nothing to do with star power or reputation. It was the uncomfortable sense that one man had already decided the rules of the game, and the other hadn't bothered to tell anyone he was playing yet. The scene was simple on paper. A room, two men, a brief exchange that existed only to move the story forward. Dean had 4 lines. None of them demanded force. None offered cover. It was the kind of scene where an actor could disappear if the atmosphere turned against him, which is exactly why it had been scheduled early in the day, before tempers were warmed and positions clearly staked. The camera rolled. Dean hit his mark precisely. Not stiff, not casual. Present. He delivered the first line cleanly, without emphasis. Before he could finish the second, Mitchum shifted his weight and spoke. Not his dialogue, but a comment, angled toward the director. "Hold on," he said, half smiling. "That's interesting. Is that how we're reading it now?" The question hung in the air, dressed up as concern. No accusation. Just enough doubt to poison the moment. The director hesitated. A glance toward the crew. No one moved. Dean waited. He didn't correct Mitchum. Didn't explain himself. He stood there, eyes steady, breathing even, as if interruptions were simply part of the script. Mitchum continued, softer now, conversational. He suggested a different rhythm. A pause where Dean hadn't paused. A look that implied uncertainty where none had existed. It sounded like mentorship. It landed like erosion. Someone near the sound cart laughed quietly. It stopped almost immediately. The director nodded, grateful for direction that wasn't coming from him. "Let's try that," he said. They reset. This time, Mitchum leaned into it. He interrupted again, mid-line, this time with a sharper edge. "No, no, you're playing it like a singer waiting for applause. Strip it down." The word singer landed deliberately. A ripple moved through the crew. Not shock. Recognition. This was no longer accidental. One of the assistants cleared his throat and muttered something about continuity. Mitchum turned his head just enough to shut it down. "We're fine," he said. The assistant disappeared back into silence. Dean adjusted nothing outwardly, but inside, details locked into place. The exact phrasing, the timing, who had looked down, who had looked away. This wasn't improvisation. It was a test. Mitchum wasn't trying to improve the scene. He was establishing terms. They went again. Dean delivered the line with less color, less invitation. Mitchum didn't interrupt this time. He waited until the cut. Then he laughed. Not loud, almost indulgent. "See?" he said, to no one in particular. "That's closer." No one responded. Dean nodded once. A small gesture, neutral enough to mean nothing. Or everything. As the crew reset the lights, Mitchum leaned against a crate, satisfied. The balance felt right to him now. Control restored. Dean stepped away from the set, not toward his chair, not toward the monitor, but toward the edge of the room, where he could watch without being watched. His face showed no trace of irritation. What settled instead was something colder, more precise. He wasn't offended. He was calculating. And somewhere between the cables on the floor and the quiet compliance of the room, it became clear to anyone paying attention. This wasn't about ego anymore. It was about endurance. And who would blink first? The break came without announcement. Lunch was called, chairs scraped back, the set loosened its grip. Most of the crew drifted toward habit. Cigarettes, jokes that went nowhere, the comfort of complaining. Mitchum disappeared into his corner, surrounded by a familiar gravity. People gave him space without being told. Dean didn't go to his trailer. Instead, he crossed the stage slowly, as if undecided, then stopped near the edge of the set, where the assistant director and the script supervisor stood over a marked-up copy of the scene. He waited until they noticed him. No urgency, no entitlement. "Can I ask something small?" he said, voice low enough not to carry. They leaned in, grateful for the quiet. Dean pointed to a single line, not one of his, a transition beat that barely registered on first reading. He asked about timing, whether the pause before it was written or implied, whether the camera was meant to stay wide or drift closer. It sounded technical, almost trivial, but he listened carefully to every answer. Asked once more, slightly differently. Clarifying tone, not text. The script supervisor glanced at the assistant director, surprised by the precision. This wasn't vanity. It was alignment. A few feet away, Mitchum watched without turning his head. He'd seen this type before, or thought he had. Actors who tried to compensate with preparation. It amused him. Preparation was useful only until instinct took over. And instinct was where he lived. What Mitchum didn't see was the shift in Dean's posture. Not confidence, intention. Dean wasn't gathering ammunition. He was adjusting his footing. Later, near the soundstage door, Dean spoke briefly with one of the writers. Not about character, about silence. About what happened if a line landed and no one rushed to fill the space after it. The writer nodded, intrigued. Made a note he wasn't sure he'd ever use. Word traveled quietly. Nothing dramatic. Just fragments. Mitchum hated losing control once the scene left the page. He relied on dominance in the moment, on momentum. When things went off book without his hand on the wheel, his timing slipped. Not badly. Just enough. Dean said nothing to confirm this. He didn't need to. When the assistant director announced they'd be picking up with a revised version of the scene, longer, fewer cuts, Mitchum smiled. A real smile this time. He saw it as generosity. Dean volunteering for difficulty. A mistake actors like him made when they tried to prove seriousness. "Bold choice," Mitchum said lightly, passing him on the way back to set. Dean returned the nod. "Thought it served the picture." No edge, no subtext, but something in the room had settled differently. The quiet wasn't tense now. It was anticipatory. People stood where they could see better. The camera operator checked focus twice, not out of habit, but expectation. Dean took his place. He didn't rehearse. He didn't run lines under his breath. He waited, grounded, still, as if the scene would come to him rather than the other way around. Mitchum rolled his shoulders, confident, ready to dominate the space as he always had. What neither the crew nor the audience could yet articulate was the change in balance. Nothing had exploded. No words had been exchanged. But the ground had shifted. And when the scene began again, it would no longer be on Mitchum's terms alone. The set felt tighter now, though nothing physical had changed. Same walls, same marks on the floor, same tired cables taped down at the edges. But the air had weight. The kind that settles when people sense something might happen and don't know what to call it yet. The director wanted a long take, fewer interruptions. Let the scene breathe. It was the sort of decision that flattered actors with reputations built on instinct and control. Mitchum welcomed it openly, cracking his neck, loosening his shoulders as if preparing for a familiar fight he expected to win. Dean said nothing. When the camera rolled, the difference was immediate, though subtle enough that it took a few seconds to register. Dean spoke less than he had in rehearsal. Not fewer lines, but fewer signals. No cues asking to be followed. His pauses weren't decorative. They were structural. Each one closed a door Mitchum usually walked through without resistance. Mitchum entered the scene with confidence, pushing the rhythm forward, ready to bend it around himself. Halfway through his first exchange, he glanced at Dean, expecting a reaction that didn't arrive. Dean held eye contact a fraction longer than before, then looked away, not in retreat, but completion, as if the moment had already finished its work. Mitchum adjusted. Slightly faster delivery, a touch more edge. The tactic was familiar. Apply pressure, regain dominance. It didn't land. Dean stayed exactly where he was, voice level, timing exact. He didn't chase Mitchum's energy. He let it pass and settle. The effect was quiet, but unmistakable. The scene stopped orbiting around Mitchum's performance and began to balance itself. A small thing happened then, barely visible. Mitchum came in a beat early on a line, corrected himself. No one would have called it a mistake under normal circumstances, but the camera caught it. The sound man noticed. The script supervisor's pencil paused in midair. The director didn't call cut. That was new. Dean continued, unhurried, unforced. His stillness wasn't passive. It was anchoring. Mitchum, sensing the shift too late, pushed harder, adding color where restraint was needed. It felt excessive now, uncalibrated. When the final line landed, there was no release, no collective exhale, just silence. Cut, the director said, finally. No applause, no commentary. People looked at the monitor instead of at each other. The camera operator removed his eye from the viewfinder slowly, as if adjusting to a different room. The assistant director checked the time, then didn't say anything. Mitchum laughed under his breath. The sound meant to dissolve tension. It didn't. He rolled his shoulders again, but the movement looked less certain this time. Dean stepped back from his mark, calm, neutral. No acknowledgement of what had happened. No attempt to claim it. The director cleared his throat. "Let's take a minute," he said. Not to correct, not to reframe. Just time. That minute stretched. Something had shifted, but no one rushed to name it. The balance hadn't flipped. It had tilted, just enough that everyone felt it underfoot. Dean waited, hands at his sides, breathing steady. Mitchum stood apart, suddenly aware of the space around him. The scene was over. The consequences had just begun. The screening room was never meant for judgment, but that was what it became. A narrow space, dim lights, folding chairs that creaked when anyone shifted their weight. The projector hummed with a tired steadiness, throwing unfinished images onto the wall, grainy, uneven, alive in ways polished footage never was. This was the rough cut. No music, no correction, just truth, unprotected. People settled in quietly, not ceremoniously, not with expectation, but with a faint awareness that what they were about to see mattered more than usual. Mitchum sat toward the back, legs stretched, arm draped over the chair beside him. He looked relaxed, almost bored. Dean took a seat closer to the aisle, hands folded loosely, eyes forward. The scene began. At first, nothing seemed different. Familiar blocking, familiar light. Then, the rhythm asserted itself, slower, more deliberate than anyone remembered. Mitchum entered strong, assertive, filling the frame the way he always did. But something resisted him now. Not opposition. Absence. Dean's presence didn't compete. It absorbed. As the scene unfolded, it became uncomfortable in a way no one had anticipated. Mitchum's energy felt oversized, slightly misjudged. Not wrong, just exposed. Dean's restraint gave every excess something to bounce off, and the echo wasn't flattering. Someone in the front row leaned forward. When the scene ended, the projector kept running, rattling through leader tape. No one spoke right away. The silence wasn't reverent, It was evaluative. A producer cleared his throat. "There's something interesting happening with control here," he said, choosing his words carefully. "The frame feels steadier than usual." He didn't look at Mitchum. Another voice followed. "Yeah, it holds. You don't feel pushed." Mitchum smiled, trying to reclaim the moment. "Guess I'll have to tone it down," he said lightly. "Didn't realize we were making a meditation." No one laughed. Dean turned his head slightly. Not toward Mitchum, but toward the producer. "The scene works because it breathes," he said. "Calm. Measured. If it feels restrained, that's the story doing its job." He wasn't defending himself. He was defending the cut. "That changed the temperature." The producer nodded. "Exactly." Mitchum shifted in his chair. The ease he'd carried in with him was gone now, replaced by something tighter. He tried again, softer this time. "We can always punch it up later." Dean didn't respond. He didn't need to. What mattered was the quiet alignment happening around them. A few heads nodded. Someone scribbled a note. Not declarations, just recognition. For the first time since production began, Mitchum wasn't the gravitational center of the room. He wasn't dismissed. He was simply one of them. The projector clicked off. Lights came up slowly. People stood, conversations beginning in low tones, none of them circling back to Mitchum. He remained seated a moment longer, watching the room reorganize itself without him. Dean stood last. No satisfaction in his expression. No victory. Just composure. The kind that doesn't require reinforcement. This wasn't a reversal born of confrontation. It was something more permanent. You could argue with criticism. You could joke your way out of embarrassment. But what had just happened couldn't be acted away. It had been seen. And once something like that is seen, it doesn't disappear. By the end of the day, exhaustion had flattened the set. The lights burned hotter than usual. Or maybe it just felt that way after 12 hours of restraint. Voices dropped. Movements slowed. This was the hour when mistakes happened. When patience ran out and masks slipped without warning. They were shooting one of the final scenes. Emotionally dense. Technically unforgiving. The kind that demanded trust between actors because there would be no coverage to hide behind. One long take. No safety net. Mitchum had been quiet all afternoon. Too quiet. When he stepped into position, there was a sharpness to him now, coiled and intentional. Dean noticed it immediately. So did the director. But no one stopped the process. Stopping it would have meant acknowledging what everyone felt, that something unresolved had been waiting for the right moment to surface. The camera rolled. From the first exchange, Mitchum pushed. He altered tempo without warning, stretching syllables, then snapping them short. He spoke over pauses that had been agreed upon, invaded spaces that had been deliberately left open. It was framed as freedom, but it was pressure, designed to force adjustment, to provoke reaction. Dean didn't chase him. When Mitchum rushed, Dean stayed still. When Mitchum crowded a line, Dean let the silence stand. He didn't compensate. He didn't rescue the rhythm. He allowed the imbalance to exist. The effect was immediate and unsettling. Mitchum leaned harder, improvising where structure was needed, reaching for dominance the way he always had. But without resistance to push against, his momentum turned inward. His timing slipped. A line landed flat. Another arrived too late. The scene began to unravel, not dramatically, not loudly, but visibly. A cable creaked as someone shifted behind the camera. The sound mixer's jaw tightened. The script supervisor stopped writing. Mitchum missed a cue, corrected himself, pressed on. Dean held his position, eyes steady. voice unchanged. His stillness wasn't defiance. It was permission. Permission for the scene to reveal exactly what was happening. Finally, it became undeniable. "Cut!" the director said. The word didn't snap. It dropped. For a moment, no one moved. Mitchum stood frozen, chest rising too fast, eyes scanning the room for confirmation that didn't come. The director didn't look at Dean. He didn't need to. "We'll reset," he said quietly. "Let's take 5. That was it. No lecture, no explanation. The damage had already occurred. Dean stepped back from the set, not in retreat, but completion. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't asked for control. He had simply refused to surrender it. Mitchum turned away, rubbing his face, aware now of something he couldn't argue with. The room no longer bent around him. It waited. Crew members avoided his eyes, not out of fear, but out of discomfort. The kind that comes when a truth surfaces publicly and can't be put back. Dean said nothing. Not then. Not after. His silence wasn't absence. It was final. Production ended without ceremony. No wrapped speeches. No bottles passed around. The last light was powered down, the last cable coiled with mechanical care. People drifted off the stage the way they had learned to move all week, quietly, without drawing attention to themselves. Mitchum sat alone near the edge of the set, jacket still on, hands resting on his knees. No one avoided him deliberately. They simply didn't orbit him anymore. The gravity was gone, and without it, he looked older. Smaller in a way that had nothing to do with stature. Dean finished a brief word with the director, nodded, and turned as if to leave. He could have walked past. Everyone would have understood. That would have been the cleanest ending. Instead, he stopped. He approached Mitchum without audience, without intent to be seen. His pace was unremarkable. When he reached him, he didn't stand over him. He pulled up a chair and sat, leaving space between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't tense. It was settled. "We got it done," Dean said finally. Not softly, not firmly, just true. Mitchum looked at him, surprised. Not by the words, but by the absence of judgment in them. He searched for something sharper behind the statement and found nothing. Dean didn't offer congratulations, didn't extend a hand. He wasn't closing a deal. This wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't victory. It was acknowledgement. Mitchum exhaled slowly. His reply came late, as if he hadn't rehearsed it in his life before. "Yeah," he said. Nothing more. A grip light passed by the doorway and slowed, catching the edge of the exchange without intruding. He would remember this moment later. Not the words, the tone. Dean stood first. He didn't wait for a response that wasn't coming. He didn't look back. As he walked away, the set felt different. Not lighter. Quieter. As if something heavy had been set down and no one rushed to replace it. Mitchum remained seated, staring at the space Dean had occupied. There was no anger in his face now. Just recognition. And something like regret, though he wouldn't have named it that. The crew finished packing. The door closed. What lingered wasn't triumph or humiliation. It was clarity. Dean hadn't won. He hadn't lost. He had refused to become what the situation demanded of him, and in doing so, left the only impression that mattered. Strength without noise. Control without cruelty. And a silence that stayed long after the lights went out.